This is week 12, video 3, Pharmaceuticals in Politics and Policy. And this is another controversial topic, and that is mandatory vaccination. And I'm just going to say at the beginning, as you do your discussion boards, etc., it is fine for everybody to have varying opinions. And that's what this class is about, discussing your varying opinions. So if you disagree with somebody's opinion, please do so respectfully and professionally. Everybody has the right to their own opinion in this class, and we respect all opinions. Okay, mandatory vaccination goes back a long way. In the 19th century, smallpox vaccinations were made mandatory, especially in England, where smallpox was a large issue. The smallpox vaccine, as you can imagine, it was in the 1800s. That's the 19th century. It had its issues. There was resistance because there was very negative. Some people actually got smallpox, so it was an issue. It did improve over time. In 1905, in the United States, the Supreme Court said that mandatory vaccination laws were constitutional to protect public health. And over time, all sorts of policies were developed to vaccines. And usually these policies were implemented to control outbreak of the disease and protect public health. No matter what, yay or nay in regards to your position on mandatory vaccination, we can say that some diseases were practically eradicated. And now we see a return of those diseases without vaccinations. Think about measles in this country. Think about polio in portions of the world. We're seeing more of those diseases come back. In the 20th century, there were, through WHO, there was a global effort to eradicate disease through vaccination program. There have always been controversies and challenges. People have concerns about the safety and how efficient and efficacy of those vaccines. And especially in the United States, issues of personal freedom and autonomy, which are so important in our country, can abut and seem to be against those efforts to vaccinate. In the United States currently and in the world currently, mandatory vaccination varies by country and region. The biggest way most countries make it mandatory is to say you have to have vaccines before you can enter school. In other countries, they're strongly recommended, but they don't make that mandatory. And when COVID-19 happened, that sparked a lot of debates about mandatory vaccination policies. There are ethical and legal considerations that make you go back and forth. Individual autonomy is very important in our country. How can we make somebody undergo a procedure against their will? But public health is also an issue, and policies that mandate vaccinations say that it is to prevent illness. It is in the public good and the good of the community as a whole. What mandatory vaccination policies are often aimed at is achieving herd immunity. And we heard a lot about that during the COVID outbreak when we had the pandemic. If a sufficient portion of the population becomes immune, then the spread of the disease is unlikely. And then risk-benefit analysis and ethical considerations. You usually have to weigh the risk and the benefit, and that risk and benefit may be different for different individuals, may be different for different countries, but their policies should take into account the balance between autonomy and risks, and the risk of the vaccine versus the risk of the disease. Informed consent is an important principle here. Patients and parents need to know about the risks and benefits of any vaccine that is being administered to them or their child. When mandates occur, the government relies on its legal authority, but legal authority varies depending on locality, not just country, but state. And in the United States, constitutionality needs to be considered. And then what are you going to do? What enforcement, what penalties if you have mandatory vaccinations? So it's a very complex situation, and you need to consider public health, personal autonomy and rights, and the role of the government in healthcare decision making when considering whether you are in support of mandatory vaccination. So the public health impact, vaccines have prevented or eradicated diseases. They've led us to herd immunity and caused a reduction in healthcare costs, because not only for the systems, but for individuals. So those need to be taken into consideration when making decisions. Trying to protect vulnerable populations who cannot be vaccinated, or who are just more vulnerable to disease, mostly the young, very young and the very old. Trying to prevent outbreaks, and then looking at global health. Those are some of the other things as a public health impact. So the controversies and opposition to that mandatory vaccination usually focus on the right of the individual and to keep the government out of healthcare. Safety concerns. There is a set of the population that concerns about the safety of vaccines. They are regularly tested for safety and approved for use, but many are concerned about those potential side effects or long-term effects. Efficacy of vaccines, because we have noted that people who were vaccinated against measles, mumps, and rubella in like the 60s and thought that that would be a lifetime immunity, many of them are saying that they need to be revaccinated. Some people believe that natural immunity is superior to vaccine-induced immunity, but you also have to look at the side effects of the disease also. Mistrust of government and mistrust of pharmaceutical companies is a huge reason that a lot of people oppose mandatory vaccination. Some people, their religious or philosophical beliefs, for example, some groups believe that vaccination goes against God's plan and is morally wrong if it's derived from either animal products or stem cells, because they're afraid that stem cells may have come from aborted fetuses, so they have strong opposition. Sometimes misinformation and misconceptions can occur, and that includes claims of what makes up the vaccines. There has been research that's been debunked about the link of vaccination to autism. I'm not saying I'm making a stand. I just want to see what the research says. But I do know there was this huge research published, I think out of Great Britain, and it was found that that the research was fraudulent, that it was not true. They falsified information. There is a perception that there is a risk, a higher risk in vaccination to some of these preventable multiple diseases, so they may become complacent. And some healthcare workers will oppose mandatory vaccination because it may affect their job security if they are mandated to have a vaccine that they may be morally, religiously opposed to having. So there's going to be controversies. They're complex, they're multifaceted. I never poo-poo anybody who, unless they are really way out there for their rationale, but we have to realize that some people do have reasons, and there are historical reasons for mistrust of the government and mistrust of pharmaceutical companies. We have to help educate people as to those risks and benefits of vaccination. So if you mandate it, you have to regulate it. You have to make laws. You have to have a regulatory framework. A lot of times they put it into school and child care requirements, as I previously said, and that kind of catches people. That used to be the case in the United States, but I think there are now exceptions. In many places, healthcare workers are required to be vaccinated, and we know that healthcare students who go into facilities are required to be vaccinated, although if there is a strong medical or religious reason why that can occur, the exceptions may be made. And then when you travel, there are immigrations and travel requirements about vaccines that you may have to show proof of vaccinations before you can enter certain countries. So that's another way that mandatory vaccination can be enforced. There have been public health campaigns. Governments use campaigns to let people know about vaccine safety and benefits of vaccination. And sometimes it might not be everybody, but there might be specific populations that have to be vaccinated. For example, as us as healthcare workers, students in dorms, military personnel, they may have mandates for certain diseases. When I entered the military in 1985, I could not say no. They actually revaccinated me against everything that I had been vaccinated against in my childhood. You really didn't have a choice. And then monitoring and reporting, if you're going to have mandatory vaccination policies, you have to assess the effectiveness of such policies, and that should inform their policy decisions and innovations in public health. It shouldn't be that we just mandate something. We should be monitoring. We should be monitoring when there are negative effects when the vaccines are given. And that is supposed to be done. You are supposed to, as a healthcare provider, if your patient has even allergic reaction or anything, there is a place where you have to go if you're a prescriber to let the government know that there was a negative effect. I don't know if that's still the case, but that's the way it was when I was prescribing. Here's a comparison again of policies in different countries. I'm not going to go into depth, but a lot of countries have at least some mandatory vaccinations that they put forth. In the United States, it's going to be determined at the state level, and states vary widely. In other countries, it may just be a couple diseases that are mandatory, and the rest of the immunizations that are out there are they're available but not mandatory. What are the future trends related to mandatory vaccination? I'm not a fortune teller, but what I see may be potentially happening is as they create new vaccines, they may expand mandatory vaccination requirements in many places. There may be stricter enforcement mechanisms. There was a look to harmonize vaccination policies across countries, but I'm not sure how that will move forward. I'm not even sure about any mandatory vaccination policies at that time. What I see happening is in states that are more conservative, you're going to see less mandatory vaccination policies. In more liberal states, you will see more mandatory vaccination policies, because it's along political lines a lot now, and a lot of parts of the Republican Party right now are against mandatory vaccinations, where more Democrats are for mandatory vaccination. And whatever happens, we're trying to develop global health security, but we need to also, as in the United States, our country is based on individual rights, so that those still need to be taken into account. And if there are mandatory vaccination policies, I think we will start seeing increasing number of legal challenges, and the courts may be called upon to decide the extent of government intervention and authority to mandate vaccination. A very controversial topic. As I said, I can see positives on both sides. I can see people's arguments. I'm not going to say what my side is, but I think that we have to be very careful to walk the fine line between autonomy and public safety.